The highway between nowhere and nowhere else stretched out like a promise that Garrett Reynolds no longer believed in. 3 days of driving, 72 hours without real sleep. Just the dull repetition of white lines and the hum of tires that kept the memories from getting too loud. It was December 23rd, 2025, 11:47 at night. The temperature had dropped to 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Norfolk, Virginia sat dark and empty ahead of him, the kind of city that looked abandoned on the night before Christmas Eve, as if everyone with a family had already gone home to pretend the world was kind. Garrett was 38 years old, Navy SEAL retired, 9 years of service, 2 deployments to Yemen, one Purple Heart he kept in a drawer because wearing it made strangers thank him for things he wasn't sure deserved gratitude. His hands hadn't stopped shaking since Sana'a, not visibly, not the kind of tremor other people noticed. But he felt it, in the steering wheel, in the coffee cup that morning, in the engagement ring that sat in his jacket pocket like a grenade he couldn't defuse. The ring belonged to Petty Officer First Class Daniel Torres. Or it had belonged to Daniel. Past tense. Everything about Daniel was past tense now. Daniel who'd handed Garrett the small velvet box 3 hours before the mission. Daniel who'd said, "Hold this for me, brother. I'm afraid I'll lose it out there." Daniel who died in Garrett's arms 400 meters from the extraction point while Garrett ran, and Daniel's blood soaked through both their uniforms, and Daniel's last words were, "Tell her I almost made it home." Garrett hadn't told her, hadn't called, hadn't delivered the ring. Because delivering the ring meant admitting that Daniel Torres was never coming back. And admitting that meant facing the truth that Garrett had carried his best friend through a firefight and still hadn't been fast enough. Atlas sat in the passenger seat. 6 years old, German Shepherd, 85 pounds of muscle and scar tissue and loyalty that didn't ask questions. Atlas had been a military working dog. 3 tours, explosive detection, tracking. The kind of animal that could smell a buried IED from 50 meters and wouldn't alert on anything that didn't matter. They'd retired Atlas after the shrapnel. A mortar had detonated 30 feet from their position in Aden. Atlas had taken fragments in his left shoulder and right flank. The scars were still visible through his black and tan coat. Raised lines of tissue that looked like someone had tried to write a message on the dog's body in a language Garrett couldn't read. But Atlas was alive, and Atlas was functional. And when the Navy decided that a dog with combat injuries wasn't fit for active duty, Garrett had signed the papers to adopt him before anyone else could make that decision. Because Atlas had saved Garrett's life twice. Once in Aden when the dog identified a pressure plate that thermal imaging had missed. Once in Sana'a when the dog pulled Garrett behind cover 3 seconds before the wall exploded. You didn't abandon the things that kept you breathing. That was the code. Even when the Navy handed you discharge papers and told you to heal in an empty apartment. Even when the only thing left to do was drive in circles and hope the movement kept the nightmares at bay. Atlas's breathing changed at 11:47. Not dramatically. The dog's lungs still worked. His heart still beat. But the rhythm shifted. The easy rolling pattern of an animal riding shotgun on a long drive became something shorter, tighter, more deliberate. His ears rotated forward. His body went rigid against the seat. His nose angled left toward the darkness beyond the windshield. And every muscle in his frame locked into the posture that Garrett had learned to trust more than satellite imagery, more than intelligence briefings, more than the promises of officers who wore stars on their shoulders and sent men into kill boxes with coordinates that turned out to be 3 degrees off. Atlas was alerting. Garrett pulled his foot off the accelerator. The truck coasted. He'd been driving without destination. No plan, no goal, just the highway and the white lines and the space between one breath and the next. But Atlas's body language was saying something that Garrett's training wouldn't let him ignore. The dog never alerted on nothing. Atlas alerted on the truth. Garrett turned the wheel. The truck entered the parking lot of the Norfolk Veterans Affairs Medical Center. He hadn't planned to come here, hadn't planned anything in 3 weeks. But the VA hospital sat on the route between nowhere and nowhere else, and his hands turned the wheel before his brain approved the decision. And Atlas's focus narrowed to a single point in the world, as if everything else, including the handler he'd spent 2 deployments trusting with his life, had ceased to exist until the threat was identified. The parking lot was nearly empty. December 23rd. Almost midnight. Christmas Eve was 90 minutes away. The people who worked here had gone home to wrap presents and drink eggnog and tell their children that Santa Claus was coming. A few security lights threw weak circles onto wet asphalt. The pavement glistened with ice that hadn't formed yet, but would by morning. The kind of cold that didn't announce itself. It just waited. patient, absolute, for someone to stop moving. Atlas pressed his nose against the passenger window. He whined. Not the casual whine of a man wanting to stretch his legs, the operational whine. The sound Atlas made when he'd identified something that required human hands because paws couldn't solve it. Garrett killed the engine. He opened both doors. Atlas hit the pavement before Garrett's boots touched the ground. The dog moved with controlled urgency, the trained intensity of an animal who understood that every alert could be the difference between a living human and a dead one, because it usually was. Atlas moved toward the back of the lot, past the ambulance bay, past the dumpsters that sat against a concrete wall painted the color of bureaucratic indifference. The dog stopped beside the green metal container. He lowered his head. He pushed his nose toward the ground behind the dumpster, and then he lay down flat, belly to pavement, chin on his paws. The trained indication for a find that wasn't explosive but was absolutely critical. Garrett stepped around the dumpster. A woman lay on flattened cardboard against the wall. She was old, 70, maybe older. Curled into the fetal position with her knees drawn up and her arms wrapped around her own chest as if she were trying to hold her body heat in through sheer willpower. Her face was gaunt, a gauntness that spoke of hundreds of missed meals, the slow erosion of a body that had stopped being fed by the world. She wore a threadbare field jacket, army green, Vietnam-era cut, over layers of donated clothing that didn't match and didn't fit, old boots held together with duct tape at the soles. Her hands were bare. Her fingers had the waxy pallor of early frostbite, and pinned to the chest of the field jacket, barely visible in the dim light, were two things that made Garrett's throat close. A 101st Airborne Division patch, Creaming Eagle, so faded the embroidery was almost invisible, and a bronze star, with V device, Combat Valor, a decorated combat veteran, dying behind a dumpster. On Christmas Eve, Garrett dropped to one knee. Ma'am, can you hear me? The woman didn't respond. Her breathing was shallow, too shallow. Her skin was cold to the touch in a way that Garrett recognized from field medicine training. Hypothermia, not early stage. The body was losing the argument with the temperature, and it was losing fast. He pressed two fingers to her neck, pulse thready, slow, body temperature dangerously low. He pulled his own jacket off. The Navy working uniform parka, lined, warm. Regulation issue that he'd never turned in when they discharged him. He wrapped it around the woman's torso. Then he scooped her up. The weight was wrong. She should have weighed 150 pounds based on her frame. She weighed maybe 110. The difference was starvation, the mathematics of a body consuming itself when the world stopped providing food. Garrett carried her to the truck. He laid her across the back seat. Atlas jumped in immediately. The dog positioned his body against the woman's legs and chest, providing warmth the way military working dogs did for wounded operators in the field, the way Atlas had pressed against Isaiah Torres in the helicopter when Torres was bleeding out and the medic was screaming for more gauze, and Garrett was holding Torres's hand and feeling the grip weaken by the second. Garrett cranked the heat to maximum. He drove the truck to the ER entrance. He did it in 42 seconds because 42 seconds was the difference between a living veteran and a dead one. The emergency room was quiet. Christmas Eve quiet. A nurse named Patricia looked up from her station when Garrett burst through the doors carrying a woman who looked like she'd been pulled from a grave. Hypothermic female, Garrett said, his voice locked into the clipped cadence of a field report. Approximately 70 years old. Found unresponsive behind the dumpsters in your parking lot. Pulse thready, respiration shallow. Skin temperature significantly below normal. Possible frostbite on both hands. She's a veteran, 101st Airborne, Bronze Star with Vadavice. Patricia didn't ask questions. She hit the call button. Within 90 seconds, the woman was on a gurney, warming blankets being applied. An IV line started. Garrett stood in the hallway with Atlas at his feet and watched through the glass partition as the ER team worked. And something in his chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. The woman's eyes opened at 1:32 a.m. They were brown, cloudy with exhaustion. But beneath the fog, there was something else. A sharpness, an intelligence, an alertness of a mind that refused to surrender even when the body had nearly given up. Her gaze found Garrett's uniform through the glass. The NWU Type 3 digital camouflage, desert pattern, and her lips moved. Garrett pushed through the door. Ma'am, you're at the VA hospital. You're safe. The woman's eyes locked onto his face. Her voice came out in a rasp that sounded like paper tearing. You're Navy. Yes, ma'am, Lieutenant Commander Garrett Reynolds, retired. A pause, the woman's chest rose and fell with visible effort. Each word cost her calories she didn't have. Eleanor Whitmore, Sergeant, 101st Airborne, Operation Desert Storm, 91 Medic. Garrett felt the words land in his chest the way they always did when one soldier identified themselves to another. Not as a greeting, as a credential, as proof that the woman on the gurney had once been someone who mattered, even if the world had decided to forget. You're going to be okay, Sergeant. Eleanor's mouth twitched, not a smile, the ghost of one. I've been okay for 72 years, son. Tonight was just closer than usual. The warming process took 2 hours. Garrett didn't leave. He sat in the hallway with Atlas pressed against his leg. He watched the monitors through the glass. He thought about Torres and the engagement ring in his pocket, about the phone call he couldn't make, about the cruelty of a world that let a Bronze Star veteran freeze behind a dumpster while a Navy SEAL sat 3 miles away with nothing to do but drive in circles and hate himself. At 2:15 a.m. Eleanor was stable enough to talk. Garrett sat in the chair beside her bed. Atlas lay on the floor between them. The dog's eyes moved from one person to the other with the patient attention of an animal who understood that humans needed time to say the things that mattered. How long have you been on the street? Garrett asked. 6 months. Maybe 7. I stopped counting. You have family. Eleanor's face changed. The sharpness in her eyes went cold. Not confused, not vague, cold. The temperature of a woman who had learned that certain words were weapons and certain people were the ones who wielded them. I have a daughter, Eleanor said. Victoria, she's 48. Does she know you're here? She knows where I am every day. She drives past my corner twice a week. Garrett's jaw tightened. She drives past you. She drops off $50 once a month. Cash. No receipt. Nothing that leaves a trail. Just enough to tell herself she's not a monster. Eleanor's voice was steady, but her hands gripped the blanket with a force that said the steadiness was costing her everything. But she's the reason I'm here, Lieutenant Commander. Not the cold, not the street. Victoria. Tell me. Eleanor looked at the ceiling for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice had the cadence of a woman who had told this story to herself 1,000 times in the dark and was finally saying it out loud to someone who might listen. My husband Thomas died 4 years ago. Cancer. 11 months from diagnosis to funeral. I held his hand every day. After he passed, I couldn't manage things. The house, the bills, the paperwork. I was grieving. And grief makes you stupid in ways you don't notice until later. Atlas lifted his head and placed his chin on the edge of Eleanor's bed. She looked down at the dog. Something in her expression cracked. Not broken, fissured, the way old stone cracks when water gets inside and freezes. Victoria offered to help, Eleanor continued. She said she'd handle the estate, said I should sign power of attorney so she could manage the finances while I recovered. Just temporary, Mom. Just until you're back on your feet. She sat at my kitchen table. She held my hand. She looked me in the eye. And I signed. Because she's my daughter. And I trusted my daughter the way I trusted the medics in my unit. Eleanor's voice didn't waver, but her eyes glistened. She drained my savings first. $340,000. Thomas and I saved that over 40 years of working, teaching, living careful. It went in 8 months. Then she sold the house, my house. The house Thomas and I raised her in, sold it to a developer for $200,000 under market value because she needed the cash fast. Garrett's hands were flat on his thighs, pressing down hard enough that his knuckles whitened. And the power of attorney let her do all of that. The power of attorney let her do everything, but that wasn't enough. Eleanor's grip on Atlas's ear tightened. The dog leaned in, accepting the pressure as if he understood that some truths needed a living anchor. Victoria hired a lawyer named Richard Langford, an elder care attorney who specializes in what he calls guardianship solutions. Langford arranged a psychiatric evaluation. A doctor I'd never met, never spoken to, conducted a 15-minute phone call and declared me mentally incompetent. They didn't examine you in person. They didn't need to. Langford knew which doctors would sign without looking. $3,000 per evaluation. Assembly line. Eleanor's voice remained steady, but the tears started, silent, running down her weathered face in tracks that caught the fluorescent light. I taught high school history for 32 years, Lieutenant Commander. The Constitution. The Bill of Rights. I can recite the Gettysburg Address from memory. I can name every major engagement of Desert Storm in chronological order. And a doctor who never laid eyes on me decided I couldn't manage my own life. Garrett felt something building in his chest that he recognized from operational briefings. Cold-focused anger that preceded action. Precision. The mind identifying a target and calculating the approach. Where did they put you? Sunrise Meadows, assisted living facility outside Richmond. Victoria signed me in, told the staff I was a fall risk with progressive dementia. They put me in a room with another woman who actually had dementia, and they collected my VA benefits every month, $1,800. And they gave me a bed and 3 meals that weren't meals and medication that I started to realize wasn't medication. What do you mean? I mean the pills changed color, size, shape. I'd been taking the same blood pressure medication for 12 years. I know what my pills look like. These weren't my pills. But when I asked, the staff told me I was confused. When I insisted, they told Victoria. Victoria called and said, "Mom, you're scaring the nurses. Just take what they give you." Garrett's jaw locked so hard his teeth ached. Atlas, sensing the shift in Garrett's breathing, pressed closer to Eleanor's bed. "I walked out 6 months ago," Eleanor said. "Didn't tell anyone. Didn't plan it. I just woke up one morning and realized that I was a line item in someone else's budget. And the medication they were giving me was either wrong or nothing. And the daughter who put me there hadn't visited in 4 months. And I'd rather die in the cold with my name than live in a room where nobody knew it." "So you've been sleeping on the street for 6 months?" "I've been sleeping wherever the wind isn't. Parking garages, underpasses, bus shelters when the security guards don't run me off. Behind your dumpster when everywhere else is full." Eleanor looked at Garrett. Her eyes were steady, fierce, absolutely clear. "I'm not crazy, Lieutenant Commander. I'm not confused. I'm not incompetent. I am a decorated combat veteran who was robbed by her own daughter and erased by a system that was supposed to protect me." Garrett believed her. Stories could be manufactured. He'd been trained to separate emotion from evidence. He believed Eleanor because Atlas hadn't moved from the old woman's bedside since they arrived. Atlas, who wouldn't go near a liar. Atlas, who had once refused to enter a room in Aden because the man inside was wearing a suicide vest and smiling. Atlas, who read human beings the way satellites read terrain. Atlas trusted Eleanor. That was enough. "There's something else," Eleanor said. Her hands shot out and gripped Garrett's wrist with surprising strength. "You don't understand. Victoria isn't just negligent. Victoria is managing this. Every month she drives by my corner and drops off $50. Not because she cares, but because if I died on the street and someone investigates, she can say she tried. She's building a paper trail of the concerned daughter who just couldn't reach her troubled mother." Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. "She's not ignoring me, Lieutenant Commander. She's curating my death." The words hit Garrett like a concussion wave. The invisible blast that didn't leave marks but rearranged everything inside you. 2 nights ago, Eleanor continued, Victoria came to my spot behind the grocery store on Hampton Boulevard. She had papers, new documents. She said if I signed them, she'd get me into a warm shelter and make sure I had food. She said it was a transfer of my remaining VA benefits, the last thing I have that she hasn't already taken. "You didn't sign." "I told her I'd rather freeze." Eleanor stopped. Her jaw worked. Her eyes left Garrett's face and fixed on the ceiling. And Garrett could see the old woman fighting something that was harder than cold, harder than hunger, harder than 6 months on the street. "She hit me," Eleanor said. "My daughter hit me. She grabbed the front of my jacket, shoved me against the wall, hit me twice across the face. And she said, 'You're going to sign, old woman. You're going to sign or I'm going to leave you in the snow and tell everyone you disappeared.'" Garrett looked at Eleanor's face. Really looked. The bruise along the left cheekbone that he'd assumed was from a fall. The split in the lower lip that he'd attributed to the cold. A daughter's fists. "I didn't sign," Eleanor said. She left, took the papers, drove away, didn't look back. The room was quiet except for the beeping of monitors and the sound of Atlas's breathing. Garrett's hand found the dog's head, held it there. He felt the steady warmth of Atlas's skull against his palm, and he used that warmth to anchor himself. Because without it, the anger building inside him would have broken something that needed to stay intact. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Not Patricia, a different one. Older, with tired eyes that had seen too many veterans come through these doors and leave the same way they arrived. "Her daughter has power of attorney," the nurse said to Garrett. "We've called Victoria Whitmore Ashford 7 times in the past 6 months. She says she'll come. She never does. We can't authorize extended care without next of kin approval, and the guardianship order means we can't override her decisions." The nurse paused. Legally, Victoria Whitmore Ashford controls whether this woman lives or dies, and Victoria Whitmore Ashford has chosen to let her die slowly. Garrett stared at the nurse. She's a Bronze Star recipient with hypothermia and assault injuries. And you're telling me the law protects the woman who put her here? I'm telling you the system wasn't designed by people who care about women like Eleanor Whitmore. It was designed by people like Richard Langford. Garrett turned back to Eleanor. The old woman's eyes were closed, but she wasn't sleeping. Her hands still gripped the blanket. Her chest rose and fell with the careful rhythm of a person conserving energy because she'd learned that energy was the last currency she had. Atlas laid his head on the bed beside Eleanor's hand. After a moment, Eleanor's fingers uncurled from the blanket and found the dog's ear. She scratched it once, gently, and Atlas's tail swept the floor. Slow, steady, the wag of a bind who had found something worth guarding. Garrett sat in the chair. He stared at his phone. One call he needed to make, to Victoria Whitmore Ashford, the daughter who had beaten a veteran and left her to freeze. The woman who had turned theft into a science and abandonment into a business model. He couldn't make the call. Not yet. Not tonight. But Atlas leaned against his leg, and the dog's warmth said what words couldn't. You're here. You found her. She's alive because you followed me into a parking lot instead of driving past. Start with that. Start with the next right thing and let the rest come in when it comes. Garrett put the phone down. He looked at Eleanor. He looked at Atlas. And somewhere in the space between a dying veteran and a drunk who refused to let his handler look away, Garrett Reynolds felt something shift. Not a decision, but the ground beneath the decision, the foundation of what was coming. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve. Victoria Whitmore Ashford would come to this hospital because Garrett was going to call her and use the voice that made enemy combatants reconsider their career choices. And when Victoria arrived with her rehearsed concern and her expensive clothes and her curated fiction of the caring daughter, she was going to find a Navy SEAL and a military working dog standing between her and her mother. And for the first time in 3 weeks, Garrett Reynolds felt something other than grief. He felt purpose, sharp, clean, aimed like a weapon at the woman who had beaten a 72-year-old war hero and left her in the snow. Atlas's amber eyes caught the fluorescent light and held it. Steady, patient, ready. Christmas Eve was coming. And with it, the reckoning. Part 2, the daughter who refused to look away. Garrett made the call at 7:14 on Christmas Eve morning. He'd been sitting in the hallway outside Eleanor's room for 5 hours, running operational scenarios the way his brain had been trained to do. Mapping variables, identifying threats, calculating responses. Atlas had slept in fragments beside him, the dog's body twitching occasionally with dreams that probably involved sand and sirens and the smell of explosive residue. Even in sleep, Atlas's ear rotated toward Eleanor's door every few minutes. Checking. Garrett dialed Victoria Whitmore Ashford's number. It rang once, twice. Hello? Victoria answered on the second ring. Wide awake, alert, the voice of a woman who'd been expecting a phone call. Mrs. Whitmore Ashford, this is Lieutenant Commander Garrett Reynolds, United States Navy. I'm calling from the Norfolk Veterans Affairs Medical Center. Your mother, Eleanor, was found last night in the hospital parking lot with hypothermia and facial injuries. She's stable, but she needs family present for medical authorization. Silence. 3 seconds. Garrett counted them the way he counted seconds during a breach, each one carrying weight, each one revealing something about the person on the other side of the door. Oh, thank God, Victoria said, and her voice cracked in exactly the right place, at exactly the right moment, with exactly the right amount of relief. Thank God someone found her. I've been worried sick. She wanders. You know how it is with the dementia. I've tried everything. The performance was flawless. The grateful daughter, the helpless family member. Every word calibrated to create the impression of a woman who'd been fighting a losing battle against her mother's decline. Garrett had heard performances like this before, in interrogation rooms in Yemen, where men smiled while the evidence burned in the courtyard outside. How soon can you get here? Garrett asked. I'm in Richmond. I can be there by 9. We'll be here. Garrett hung up. He looked at Atlas. The dog was awake now. Amber eyes fixed on Garrett's face with the steady attention of a partner who could read the difference between calm and the kind of quiet that preceded action. She's coming, Garrett said. Atlas's ears went forward, ready. But before Victoria arrived, something else happened. Something Garrett hadn't planned for. Something that would change the entire equation. At 8:32 a.m. a young woman walked through the emergency room doors carrying a duffel bag in a face that looked like someone had told her the world had ended and then asked her to fix it anyway. She was 26. Blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail that had been assembled in a moving vehicle. Athletic build. The kind of woman who probably ran 5 miles every morning and taught yoga on weekends. She wore jeans and a Boston University sweatshirt and boots that had clearly been grabbed in a hurry because they didn't match. She stopped at the nurse's station. Her voice carried down the hallway. "I'm looking for Eleanor Whitmore. I got a call that she was brought in last night. I'm her granddaughter." Garrett stood up. Atlas stood with him. The woman turned. Her eyes found Garrett's uniform. Then Atlas. Then Garrett's face. And something in her expression shifted from panic to calculation. The kind of rapid assessment that came from a mind that knew how to process information under pressure. "You're the one who found her." A statement. "Lieutenant Commander Garrett Reynolds. And you are Harper Whitmore." She crossed the distance between them in 6 strides, extended her hand, firm grip, dry palm, no hesitation. "Eleanor is my grandmother. My father was her older brother. He died 3 years ago. Car accident. I've been trying to reach Eleanor for 6 months. Every number I had was disconnected. Every address came back undeliverable. I filed a missing person report in August. Norfolk PD told me Eleanor had been seen but declined assistance." Harper's voice was steady, but her eyes were red, the kind of red that came from crying in a car for 2 hours on the drive from Boston. "You didn't know she was on the street," Garrett said. "I didn't know she existed anywhere. The last time I spoke to her was April. She called to wish me happy birthday. Said she was living with Victoria. Said everything was fine. Then nothing. Radio silence. I thought maybe she was angry at me for something. I thought maybe Victoria had convinced her I was too busy to care. I didn't think." Harper stopped. Her hand went to her mouth. "Is she okay?" The nurse said hypothermia. She said facial injuries. "She's stable. She's strong. But there's something you need to know before you see her." Garrett told Harper everything. The parking lot, the Bronze Star, the power of attorney, the guardianship, Sunrise Meadows, the medication, the 6 months on the street, Victoria's monthly $50 payments, the papers 2 nights ago, the assault. Harper listened without interrupting. Her face went through a sequence of emotions that Garrett cataloged like terrain features. Shock, disbelief, horror, and then something harder, colder. The temperature of a person who just learned that someone they trusted had committed an act so fundamentally wrong that forgiveness wasn't even a consideration. Victoria did this, a statement of fact delivered in the tone of a prosecutor reading charges. Victoria drained her accounts, sold her house, put her in that facility, and then left her to die on the street. That's what Eleanor says, and I believe her. "Why?" Garrett looked down at Atlas. The dog was sitting beside Harper now, leaning against her leg the way he'd been leaning against Eleanor. The universal signal that Atlas had identified someone worth protecting. "Because my dog believes her, and my dog doesn't make mistakes about people." Harper looked at Atlas. She reached down slowly, let the dog sniff her hand. Then she scratched behind his ears with the automatic competence of someone who'd grown up around animals. "What's his name?" "Atlas." "Atlas." Harper repeated it like she was testing the weight. "Okay, Atlas trusts Eleanor. You trust Atlas. I trust you, which means Victoria Whitmore Ashford just made the biggest mistake of her life." Harper stood. Her expression had shifted again. Purpose. "I'm going to find out exactly what Victoria did, how she did it, who helped her, and I'm going to make sure that every single person involved answers for it. Not just for Eleanor, for everyone Victoria has done this to. Because if she did it to my grandmother, she's done it to others." Garrett studied the young woman in front of him, the teacher from Boston who'd driven through the night, who'd walked into a hospital looking for answers and found a war instead, who'd just made a tactical decision to engage rather than retreat. "You understand what you're saying. Victoria has money, connections. Her husband is a federal judge. She's built a legal framework that's protected her for years. Taking her down isn't going to be easy." "I don't care if it's easy." Harper's voice was flat, final. "I care if it's right. Eleanor wore a Bronze Star. She served her country. She taught history to kids who didn't want to learn it for 32 years. She raised Victoria alone after my grandfather died. And Victoria repaid her by stealing everything and leaving her to freeze behind a dumpster." Harper's eyes met Garrett's. "I'm a 4th grade teacher. I make $38,000 a year. I live in a one-bedroom apartment in Dorchester. I have $1,700 in my checking account and a student loan that'll take me 20 years to pay off. But I have time, and I have anger, and I'm pretty good at research. So if you're willing to help me, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Garrett felt something click into place. The same sensation he got when a mission brief finally made sense. When all the variables aligned and the objective became clear. Victoria's coming here at 9. She's going to walk in here with her performance ready. She's going to cry and apologize and play the devoted daughter. And she's going to try to get Eleanor to sign papers that transfer her last VA benefits. Are you ready to see that? I'm ready to stop it. Good. Then here's what we're going to do. Victoria Whitmore Ashford walked through the emergency room doors at 8:52 a.m., 8 minutes ahead of schedule, which told Garrett she'd been driving fast, which told him she was anxious, which told him this wasn't the visit of a worried daughter coming to comfort her mother. This was damage control. Victoria was 48 but looked younger. Money and avoidance could make a person look younger. Soft around the middle in the way that came from yoga classes and organic meal delivery. Blonde hair professionally maintained. A navy peacoat that cost more than Eleanor's entire wardrobe. On her left wrist, a watch that Garrett priced at roughly $4,000. On her ring finger, a diamond that could have funded Eleanor's street survival for a year. In her right hand, a leather portfolio, carried against her hip. The way a person carries something they don't want people to notice. Victoria approached the nurse's station with her hand extended and her face arranged into the expression of a woman who had practiced gratitude in the rearview mirror during the 2-hour drive. I'm Victoria Whitmore Ashford. I received a call about my mother, Eleanor Whitmore. I'm her power of attorney. Patricia, the nurse who'd admitted Eleanor, looked at Victoria with an absence of warmth that came from seeing too many families who cared more about paperwork than patients. Whitmore is in room 4. Her doctor will need to speak with you about treatment options. Victoria started toward the hallway. Atlas stood up. The dog positioned himself between Victoria and the corridor. His body language shifted into something Garrett had only seen in operational context. Ears back, weight forward, eyes locked on the approaching human with focused assessment. Victoria stopped. Her eyes dropped to Atlas. And for the first time since she'd walked through the doors, something authentic crossed her face. Fear of the dog. He's friendly? Victoria asked. He's accurate, Garrett said. He'd been standing against the wall, watching, waiting. Now he stepped forward. Navy uniform, 6 feet 1 inch, 190 pounds of muscle and scar tissue and intensity. Victoria's eyes flicked to Garrett's face, and in that fraction of a second the mask slipped. Just enough for Garrett to see what lived behind the performance. Calculation. The rapid computation of a woman assessing how much this Navy SEAL knew and how much was being guessed. Lieutenant Commander Garrett Reynolds, I'm the one who found your mother last night, behind the dumpster, in 18-degree weather, with bruises on her face. She falls. The response was too quick, too practiced. The dementia, her balance is compromised. The doctors at Sunrise Meadows documented it. The bruises are on her left cheekbone and lower lip, consistent with being struck by a right-handed person. Victoria's smile didn't change, but the muscles around her eyes tightened by a fraction. I appreciate your concern, Lieutenant Commander. I really do. But my mother's condition is complex, and the family situation is private. We have medical professionals handling her care. We have a legal framework in place. Power of attorney. Yes, filed properly. Reviewed by a licensed attorney, Richard Langford. The name landed like a bullet. Garrett watched Victoria's reaction. The woman was good. Her expression barely changed, but her grip on the leather portfolio tightened. Just slightly. Just enough. You've done your research. The warmth was gone from Victoria's voice. What replaced it was cool, measured, professional. I've done enough. Your mother told me about the savings, the house, the evaluation, the medication changes at Sunrise Meadows. My mother tells a lot of stories. That's part of the condition. She recited the Gettysburg Address from memory at 2 a.m. while her body temperature was still below normal. That's a woman with a daughter who's been stealing from her. Victoria's face flushed. Her hand tightened on the portfolio. You need to be very careful, Lieutenant Commander. You found my mother in a parking lot. That's admirable. But you don't know our family. You don't know our history. And you don't have the legal standing to interfere with a court-approved guardianship. I have the standing of a man who carried your mother out of the snow last night while you were sleeping in Richmond. And I have a beau who won't let you through that door. which in my experience means the dog knows something I'm still figuring out. Atlas hadn't moved. His body remained positioned between Victoria and Eleanor's room. His eyes hadn't left Victoria's face since she entered the building. Garrett had worked with Atlas for 4 years. He had never seen the dog sustain a focused alert on a person this long without an explicit command. Atlas wasn't responding to aggression. He was responding to deception. Victoria looked at the dog, then at Garrett, then at the portfolio in her hand. Her jaw worked as if she were chewing on something bitter. Then she straightened her shoulders. "I'd like to see my mother. Privately." No, the word was quiet, final. Victoria's eyes widened. "Excuse me. Your mother is a patient in a VA facility with documented hypothermia, malnutrition, and assault injuries. She's not receiving private visitors until the attending physician clears it. You can wait." Victoria stared at Garrett for 5 seconds. Then she nodded once, turned, walked to the waiting room. She sat down, opened the leather portfolio on her lap, and began organizing papers with focused attention. Garrett watched her through the glass partition. The papers, the portfolio. Victoria hadn't driven 2 hours on Christmas Eve morning to hold her mother's hand. She'd driven 2 hours to get a signature. Harper stepped out from the supply closet where she'd been watching. Her face was pale, her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. "That's Victoria. That's the woman who used to braid my hair when I was 6, who taught me how to make chocolate chip cookies, who came to my college graduation and cried and told me she was proud of me. People reveal themselves when there's something to take." Harper looked at Victoria through the glass. "I'm calling someone, a friend from college. She works for NCIS in Portsmouth. If anyone can help us take Victoria down, it's Lena Cross." Agent Lena Cross walked into the VA hospital at 10:23 a.m., and the first thing she did was look at Atlas, not at Garrett, not at the hallway, not at the file folder Garrett had prepared. She looked at the German Shepherd sitting beside Garrett's chair, and her eyes stayed there for 3 seconds before she spoke. "Military working dog. 2 deployments, explosive detection and tracking. He's been sitting outside Eleanor Whitmore's room all night. Hasn't left the patient's proximity since we arrived." Cross nodded once, and Garrett saw something shift in her posture. The slight straightening of a professional who had just reclassified this case from probable family dispute to confirmed operational priority. Cross was 42, dark hair pulled back, sharp features that carried intensity. She wore a charcoal suit and practical shoes and carried herself with economy of movement. "Walk me through it," Cross said. Garrett did, every detail: the parking lot, Eleanor's condition, the Bronze Star, the power of attorney, Richard Langford, the guardianship, Sunrise Meadows, the medication. 6 months on the street. Victoria's arrival with the portfolio. Cross listened without interrupting. She took notes on a small pad with handwriting so precise it looked typed. When Garrett finished, she capped her pen and looked at him. "Richard Langford has been on our peripheral radar for 18 months. 2 complaints from VA social workers. Neither generated enough evidence because the victims were too afraid to testify, and the families were too protected by the guardianship paperwork." She paused. "If Eleanor Whitmore is willing to go on record, this isn't just one case. This is the case that opens a door we've been trying to unlock for a year and a half." "How many others?" Harper asked. She'd been standing silent, listening. Now her voice cut through with sharp clarity. Cross turned to Harper. "You're the granddaughter." "Yes." "You understand what you're asking me to tell you." "I understand that my grandmother was left to die behind a dumpster. And I understand that Victoria didn't invent this system alone. So how many others?" Cross pulled out a tablet, opened a file. "Based on public filings alone, Langford has processed 23 guardianship petitions in the Norfolk-Richmond corridor over the past 4 years. 16 of those petitions involve military veterans receiving VA benefits." The number hung in the air like smoke. 16. Harper repeated the word flat, toneless. "The pattern is identical across all 16 cases. Family member seeks guardianship. Langford arranges competency evaluation through one of 3 doctors on rotation. Court approves petition based on evaluation. Family member assumes financial control. Veterans' assets and benefits are systematically redirected." "How much total?" Garrett asked. "Based on preliminary estimates from the filings, $4.7 million. That's documented assets plus diverted benefits over 4 years. It doesn't account for care facility payments. Places like Sunrise Meadows collect government reimbursements for services they're not providing. The actual number could be substantially higher." Harper's hand went to the wall, steadying herself. $4.7 million stolen from the people who served their country. 2 of the 16 veterans are deceased, Cross said. Her voice dropped to a quiet register. Harold Mitchell, 80 years old Korean War veteran, Silver Star, died in a Richmond care facility from what was listed as cardiac failure. His nephew paid Langford $15,000 to obtain guardianship. The cardiac medication on file at the facility doesn't match Harold's VA prescription. They switched his medication, Harper said. Same pattern as Eleanor's case. The second deceased veteran is Evelyn Carter, 76, Iraq War, 2 Purple Hearts, found dead in her car behind a church in Virginia Beach. She'd been living in that car for 4 months after her son used Langford's services to obtain guardianship while her daughter was deployed overseas. Evelyn's daughter came home from deployment and found her mother's house sold, her savings gone, and her mother dead in a parking lot. Garrett felt the information land in his chest the way shrapnel landed. Hot, sharp, deep enough to scar. Eleanor is alive, Cross said, and Eleanor can testify. That's why this matters. She's not just one woman's case. She's the key witness in a federal elder exploitation network. Harper's phone buzzed. She'd set up Google alerts for Langford's name. A new court filing. She opened it. Her face went white. There are 4 more, Harper said, her voice tight. 4 more guardianship petitions filed in the past 60 days. All veterans, all using the same doctors. Victoria and Langford have a waiting list. Cross looked at the screen. Her jaw tightened. These aren't closed cases. These are active targets, which means we can stop them before the damage is done. Who are they? Garrett asked. Harper read from the screen. Robert Brennan, 68 Navy, filed November 15th. Catherine O'Neill, 71 Army nurse, filed November 28th. James Kowalski, 65 Marines, filed December 3rd. And Margaret Ashby, 73 Air Force, filed December 10th. 4 people who are about to lose everything, Cross said, unless we move faster than Victoria expects. Harper looked at Cross. What do we need to do? First, Eleanor needs a legitimate competency evaluation. Something that proves the original assessment was fraudulent. Can she do that? She can recite the Gettysburg Address. She knows every major engagement of Desert Storm. She's sharper than most people half her age. Then we get Dr. Sarah Okafor to conduct a formal evaluation. She's the VA staff psychiatrist. If she certifies Eleanor as competent, Langford's entire legal framework collapses. Every guardianship he filed becomes questionable. Every doctor who signed without examining becomes liable. Every family member who paid him becomes prosecutable. Cross looked at Harper. But I need you to understand something. Victoria has resources. Her husband is a federal judge. She has attorneys on retainer. She will fight this. Hard. Are you prepared for that? My grandmother wore a Bronze Star. She saved 5 soldiers under fire in Desert Storm. She came home and taught history to ungrateful teenagers for 32 years. She raised Victoria alone after my grandfather died. And Victoria repaid her by stealing everything and leaving her to freeze behind a dumpster on Christmas Eve. Harper's voice didn't rise. It hardened. So, yes, Agent Cross, I'm prepared, because Eleanor deserves justice. And so do Harold Mitchell and Evelyn Carter and the 14 other veterans whose names I don't even know yet. Victoria Whitmore Ashford doesn't get to walk away from this. Not while I'm still breathing. Cross almost smiled. Then let's get to work. The next 72 hours moved with compressed intensity. Every hour mattered, every decision cascaded. Dr. Sarah Okafor conducted Eleanor's evaluation on December 26th. 90 minutes. Comprehensive. Documented with meticulous precision. The results were definitive. Mini mental state examination, 29 out of 30. Eleanor lost 1 point on date orientation because she said it was December 25th when it was technically the 26th. Her long-term memory was exceptional. Her reasoning was sound. Her verbal recall was in the 95th percentile for her age group. Eleanor Whitmore is cognitively intact. Dr. Okafor told Garrett and Harper in the hallway outside Eleanor's room. The original evaluation was either grossly incompetent or deliberately fabricated. There is no evidence of dementia in this patient. Her brain is sharper than most 30-year-olds I evaluate. Harper had been staying at the hospital, sleeping in the chair beside Eleanor's bed. Atlas had taken to sleeping on the floor between them. The dog had decided that both women were under his protection, and what Atlas decided became operational reality. On December 27th, Harper began the real work. She returned to Eleanor's abandoned house, the one Victoria had sold 9 months ago. The new owners were a developer couple from Richmond. They'd gutted the interior, removed 40 years of memories, painted everything gray, put it back on the market for twice what they'd paid Victoria. But they'd kept one thing, the attic, full of boxes they hadn't bothered to move. Eleanor's teaching materials, photo albums, tax returns going back 30 years. And buried in a box marked Thomas, personal, Harper found what she was looking for. Financial statements, bank records, investment accounts, documentation of every dollar Eleanor and Thomas had saved over 40 years. $341,622.18, accumulated through teaching salaries and careful living and disciplined saving. Harper photographed every page, built a timeline, tracked the money, and what she found made her hands shake so hard she had to put the phone down. The $341,000 had moved in a specific pattern, first to an account in Victoria's name, then distributed across 6 different accounts, then consolidated, then transferred to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, then brought back into the United States through a real estate investment trust that Victoria's husband's law firm managed. Money laundering. Sophisticated, professional, the kind of operation that required expertise. Harper called Garrett. Victoria didn't do this alone. She had help. Financial help, legal help. This isn't just a daughter stealing from her mother. This is organized crime. How much can you prove in all of it? I have the statements, the transfers, the account numbers, everything Eleanor and Thomas documented. They kept records like they were preparing for an audit, which means we can trace every dollar Victoria stole and show exactly where it went. Send everything to Cross. She needs to see this. Harper did, and when Cross saw the financial documentation, she made 3 phone calls. One to the FBI Financial Crimes Division, one to the U.S. Attorney's Office, one to a federal magistrate judge who owed her a favor. By December 28th, they had a warrant for Richard Langford's office, for his files, his computers, his client records, everything. Federal marshals executed the warrant at 2:15 p.m. Langford was shredding documents when they arrived. He'd been at it for at least 30 minutes. Someone had tipped him off, but the shredder hadn't finished its work. The marshals recovered partial files on 8 of the 16 veterans, financial ledgers showing payments from family members to Langford, $15,000 to $20,000 per case, a contact list of 3 doctors who signed evaluations, Dr. Martin Shelby, Dr. Linda Grant, Dr. Hector Fuentes, and correspondence with Sunrise Meadows administration discussing patient revenue optimization. The phrase made Garrett want to break something, patient revenue optimization, as if veterans were commodities, as if human beings could be reduced to profit margins and quarterly earnings. But there was something else in Langford's files, something that made Cross call Garrett at 11 p.m. on December 28th with a voice that carried the weight of discovery. We found a ledger, handwritten. Langford kept it in a safe. It lists every veteran he processed, the family member who paid him, the doctor who signed, and the estimated value of the estate. He kept score. He kept a running total of how much he'd stolen from people who served this country. The ledger shows $4.7 million, but that only covers what Langford tracked. There are notations, references to cash payments, off-book transactions. The actual losses could exceed $7 million. Harper was listening on speakerphone. Her face had gone pale. $7 million from people who earned Bronze Stars and Purple Hearts and Silver Stars. There's something else. 2 names in the ledger have black lines through them. Harold Mitchell and Evelyn Carter. The deceased veterans. Langford drew lines through their names the way an accountant closes an account. He didn't write deceased. He wrote resolved. The word hung in the silence. Resolved. 2 people who had survived wars, reduced to a single word in a lawyer's ledger. We're getting a warrant for Victoria, Cross said, and for Constance Harlow. She's the director of Sunrise Meadows. She knew exactly what was happening with the medication substitutions. We have emails between her and Langford discussing which patients could be transitioned to lower-cost care without family noticing. When, Garrett asked. Tomorrow morning, December 29th. We move at 0600. I want you there, and I want Harper there. Eleanor deserves to see this. At 11:47 p.m. on December 28th, Harper was alone in Eleanor's hospital room. Garrett had gone to his truck to get Atlas's food. Eleanor was sleeping. The hallway was quiet. 2 men entered the room. They didn't wear hospital uniforms. They wore black jackets and blank expressions and moved with economical precision. The first man reached for Harper's arm. Atlas erupted from beneath the bed. The dog had been resting there, silent, waiting. And the moment the stranger's hand touched Harper, 85 pounds of trained violence launched itself across 6 feet of hospital floor. Atlas's jaws closed on the first man's forearm. The sound of bones breaking was audible in the quiet room. The man screamed, tried to pull away. Atlas held on, dragging the man to the ground with relentless force. The second man pulled a knife. Garrett came through the door at a dead run. He'd heard the scream. He hit the second man with a shoulder strike that sent the knife skittering across the floor. 3 seconds of close quarters combat. Precise, brutal, efficient. The man went down hard. Hospital security arrived 90 seconds later. Norfolk PD 6 minutes after that. The two men were arrested, searched. Both had criminal records. Both had $5,000 in cash in their pockets, exactly $2,500 each, and both had a phone number saved under V. And when the police called the number, Victoria Whitmore Ashford answered on the second ring. "Is it done?" she asked. The detective identified himself. There was a long silence. Then Victoria hung up. That was the moment Victoria Whitmore Ashford went from suspect to fugitive. At 5:42 a.m. on December 29th, Harper's phone rang, an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Is this Harper Whitmore?" The voice was female, young, scared. "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Rachel. I work at Sunrise Meadows, night shift. I heard what you're doing, about Mrs. Whitmore, about the investigation." Harper sat up. "Go on." "There are 8 patients here right now who are getting the wrong medications. I've been documenting it for 6 months, taking photos of the pill bottles, recording the discrepancies, but I didn't know who to tell. Mrs. Harlow said if I talked to anyone, I'd be fired. And I'm a single mom. I can't afford to lose this job." "Rachel, what you're describing is criminal. Those patients could die." "I know, that's why I'm calling. One of them is a man named Thomas Grant. He's 74, Army veteran. His daughter put him here 3 months ago. She paid Langford to get guardianship. Mr. Grant keeps telling me he's not confused. He says his blood pressure medication doesn't look right. He's right, I checked. They're giving him sugar pills." Harper felt her heart rate spike. "Where is Thomas Grant now?" "Room 214. But Mrs. Harlow is transferring him tomorrow to some facility in West Virginia. I looked it up. It's not licensed. It's not even registered with the state. I think they're moving him because they know someone's investigating." Rachel listened to me very carefully. "NCIS is rating Sunrise Meadows at 0600. That's in 18 minutes. I need you to keep Thomas Grant in his room. Lock the door if you have to. Don't let anyone move him." "Can you do that?" A pause. "Then yes, I can do that." "You're saving his life." "I'm doing what Mrs. Whitmore would have wanted someone to do for her." The line went dead. Harper called Cross, told her everything. Cross redirected 2 agents to Sunrise Meadows with instructions to secure room 214 and take Rachel into protective custody. At 0600 hours, federal agents arrested Victoria Whitmore Ashford at her Richmond home. She was still in her bathrobe, still drinking her morning coffee, still living in the world where her mother was a problem that had been managed and her life was a carefully constructed fiction that nobody would ever question. The fiction collapsed in 42 seconds. Victoria was charged with elder financial exploitation, conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering assault, and attempted murder of Harper Whitmore. Bail was set at $500,000. Her husband, the federal judge, recused himself from anything related to the case and hired her the most expensive defense attorney in Virginia. Richard Langford was arrested at his office. Constance Harlow was arrested at Sunrise Meadows. Dr. Martin Shelby, Dr. Linda Grant, and Dr. Hector Fuentes were arrested at their homes. 6 additional family members who had paid Langford were arrested over the next 48 hours, and Thomas Grant was found in room 214, alive, malnourished, but alive. Rachel had locked the door, and when the NCIS agents arrived, Thomas Grant looked at them and said, "About damn time somebody showed up." Harper visited Eleanor on December 30th. The old woman was sitting up in bed, eating real food. Her color had returned. Her strength was coming back. Atlas lay beside the bed. The dog had barely left Eleanor's side in a week. "They arrested Victoria," Harper said. Eleanor's face didn't change. "I know, the nurse told me." "Are you okay?" "I don't know." Eleanor looked at her hands, at the IV line, at the hospital room that was cleaner and warmer than anywhere she'd slept in 6 months. "She's my daughter. I carried her for 9 months. I raised her. I loved her. And she tried to kill me." "She was killing you, slowly." Yes, Eleanor's voice was quiet. Yes, she was. Harper sat in the chair. Jit Cross says they need you to testify against Victoria, against Langford, against all of them. She says you're the key witness, the one who makes the whole case work. What about the others, the other veterans? They found 7 of the 9 survivors. Thomas Grant at Sunrise Meadows, Samuel Avery in an unlicensed facility in West Virginia. He'd been locked in a basement room. 5 others in various care homes. 2 are still missing, but they're looking. Eleanor closed her eyes. Harold Mitchell and Evelyn Carter are dead. The others were just lucky someone found them in time. You were lucky Atlas found you. I was lucky you came. Eleanor reached out, took Harper's hand. I was lucky my granddaughter decided to fight. Harper felt the tears start. I should have fought sooner. I should have looked harder. I should have known something was wrong when you stopped calling. You're fighting now. That's what matters. Eleanor squeezed Harper's hand. Will you do something for me? Anything. Tell Agent Cross I'll testify, not just for me, for all of them. For Harold and Evelyn and Thomas and Samuel and the others. For every veteran Victoria and Langford stole from. I'll testify, and I'll make sure every single person in that courtroom understands exactly what they did. Harper nodded. I'll tell her. And Harper, when this goes to trial, I want you there, next to me, because you're the reason any of this is possible. You're the one who refused to let Victoria win. We're not done yet. The trial could take months. Victoria will fight. She has resources. Let her fight. Eleanor's voice was steel. I fought in Desert Storm. I fought cancer with Thomas. I fought 6 months on the street. I can fight one more battle, especially when I know I'm going to win. Atlas lifted his head, looked at Eleanor. His tail swept the floor once. Slow, steady. Outside the window, Norfolk sat under gray December clouds. The city was moving into the last days of the year. People were making resolutions, planning futures, believing that the calendar change would bring something better. Inside room 4 of the Norfolk Foyer, a medical center, 3 people and 1 dog were preparing for war. Not the kind fought with guns and mortars, the kind fought with testimony and evidence and the slow grinding machinery of justice. Victoria Whitmore Ashford had stolen $4.7 million from 16 veterans. She had left her mother to die in the snow. She had built a business model out of betrayal. But she had made one critical mistake. She had underestimated the granddaughter who taught 4th grade and drove through the night, the Navy SEAL who followed his dog into a parking lot, and the 72-year-old Bronze Star recipient who refused to die quietly. The trial was coming, and when it did, Victoria would learn what Eleanor already knew, that some things were worth fighting for, and some people couldn't be broken, no matter how cold the night, no matter how long the street, no matter how deep the betrayal. Eleanor Whitmore had survived Desert Storm. She would survive this too, and she wouldn't survive alone. Part 3. The Verdict and the Legacy. The trial opened on February 4th, 2026. Federal District Court, Eastern District of Virginia. The prosecution built a RICO case that treated Victoria's operation as organized crime, elder financial exploitation, conspiracy, money laundering, accessory to 2 murders, attempted murder of Harper Whitmore. Victoria sat at the defense table in a gray suit that cost more than Eleanor's annual VIA benefits. Her attorney was Marshall Caldwell, former Attorney General, $250,000 retainer. He specialized in making guilty people sound reasonable. The courtroom was full, not with cameras. The judge had restricted media, but with people, VA social workers, retired military, family members of the 16 exploited veterans. And in the 3rd row, 7 elderly individuals sitting together, each wearing something that identified their service, a unit patch, a service pin, a cap with a ship's name, the surviving victims. Eleanor had insisted they be present. They need to see this, she told Harper. They need to see that the system can work when somebody forces it to. Harper testified first. She took the stand in a navy dress and practical shoes and spoke with the clear precision of a 4th grade teacher who knew how to make complicated things understandable. She walked the jury through the financial trail, the $341,000, the 6 account transfers, the offshore movement, the real estate trust. Every dollar traced, every transaction documented. The theft wasn't an accident. It was architecture. Caldwell cross-examined with surgical patience. Ms. Whitmore, you're a teacher. You make $38,000 a year. You have no forensic accounting training. No legal expertise. Isn't it possible you misunderstood what you were looking at? I teach fourth graders how to understand complex problems by breaking them into simple steps. My grandmother had $341,000. Victoria took it. That's not complicated. That's theft. The jury nodded. Three of them were taking notes. Garrett testified next. He described finding Eleanor, the Bronze Star, the hypothermia, Atlas's refusal to leave her side, Victoria's arrival with the portfolio and the notary stamp. Caldwell tried to shake him. Lieutenant Commander, you have PTSD from Yemen. You recently lost teammates. Isn't it possible your emotional state led you to see malice where there was simply family dysfunction? Garrett looked at Caldwell the way he looked at terrain before an insertion, measuring every angle, identifying every weakness. 3 weeks before I found Eleanor Whitmore, I carried Petty Officer First Class Daniel Torres 400 meters under fire to a helicopter where he died in my arms. So yes, counselor, I understand what it looks like when someone who is supposed to be protected is failed by the people in charge of protecting them. That doesn't make me biased. It makes me qualified. The courtroom went quiet. Caldwell looked at his notes. He didn't ask another question. Eleanor testified next. She walked to the stand in a donated suit with her Bronze Star pinned to the lapel. She settled into the chair and looked at the jury with steady gaze. Before the prosecutor asked his first question, Eleanor spoke. I taught the Constitution to high school students for 32 years. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. The courtroom held its breath. I believed every word, Eleanor said. I still do. I'm here because the system those words created was turned against me. And I'm here to ask the 12 of you to turn it back. She testified for 3 hours and 17 minutes. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She walked the jury through everything with methodical precision. The $340,000, 40 years of saving, gone in 8 months. The house, sold $200,000 below market value. The 15-minute phone call with Dr. Shelby, a doctor she'd never met, who declared her incompetent without seeing her face. Sunrise Meadows, the pills that changed color. The staff who told her she was confused when she wasn't. 6 months on the street, sleeping wherever the wind wasn't, eating from dumpsters, wearing the same clothes until they fell apart. Victoria's $50 a month. Not kindness, a paper trail. When the prosecutor asked Eleanor to describe the night Victoria hit her, Eleanor paused. Her hands lay flat on the witness stand, steady, but her eyes went somewhere far away for 3 seconds before coming back. My daughter grabbed my jacket. She shoved me against the wall. She hit me twice, once across the cheekbone, once across the mouth, and then she said, sign the papers or I'll leave you in the snow. And I looked at Victoria, the child I carried for 9 months, the girl I raised alone after Thomas died, the woman I trusted with everything. And I didn't recognize her. Not because of dementia, because the person standing in front of me wasn't the daughter I raised. She was a transaction. A juror in the front row pressed her hand to her mouth. Another removed his glasses and looked at the ceiling. Dr. Martin Shelby testified under subpoena. He took the stand with nervous energy. The prosecutor placed a stack of files on the railing. Dr. Shelby, how many competency evaluations did you conduct for Richard Langford's office? Approximately. I'd have to check my records. 47. You signed 47 evaluations over 4 years. How many of those patients did you examine in person? Shelby's face went gray. The evaluations were conducted by telephone. Mr. Langford explained that the patients were in facilities and couldn't travel. Not one. The information I was given indicated, Dr. Shelby, you declared 47 human beings mentally incompetent without meeting a single one of them. You were paid $3,000 per signature. That's $141,000 for 15-minute phone calls that destroyed people's lives. Shelby's attorney objected. The judge overruled. Shelby's head dropped. His hands gripped the railing. He didn't answer. His silence was louder than any testimony. Agent Cross testified about the investigation, the ledger, the resolved notation beside Harold Mitchell and Evelyn Carter's names, the 4 active targets, the patient revenue optimization emails. Rachel from Sunrise Meadows testified about the medication substitutions, the 8 patients on sugar pills. Thomas Grant's transfer to the unlicensed West Virginia facility. Thomas Grant himself testified. 74 years old. Army. He walked to the stand with a cane, but his voice was strong. I told them the pills were wrong. I told them I wasn't confused. They called my daughter. My daughter called Mrs. Harlow. Mrs. Harlow said if I didn't cooperate, they'd move me somewhere more appropriate. I found out later that more appropriate meant a basement room with a lock on the outside of the door. The trial lasted 3 weeks, 16 days of testimony, 42 witnesses, 273 pieces of evidence. On February 25, 2026, the jury began deliberations. 4 hours and 12 minutes later, they returned. The foreman stood, a retired Marine, 68 years old. He'd been taking notes throughout the entire trial. On the charge of conspiracy to commit elder financial exploitation, how do you find guilty? On the charge of fraud, guilty. On the charge of money laundering, guilty. On the charge of being an accessory to the death of Harold Mitchell, guilty. On the charge of being an accessory to the death of Evelyn Carter, guilty. On the charge of attempted murder of Harper Whitmore, guilty. Each verdict landed like a hammer strike. Final. Irrevocable. Victoria sat motionless as the verdicts were read. When the final guilty was announced, her perfect mask cracked. Not dramatically, but completely. The facade she'd maintained for 48 years shattered in an instant. She turned to look at Harper in the gallery. Her eyes were wide, disbelieving, as if she couldn't comprehend that the granddaughter she'd dismissed as irrelevant had just destroyed her entire life. Harper met her eyes, didn't look away, didn't smile, didn't gloat, just held Victoria's gaze with the steady certainty of someone who knew that justice, however slow, was still justice. Victoria looked away first. Richard Langford received the same verdicts. Guilty on all counts, conspiracy, fraud, 47 counts of fraudulent documentation, accessory to 2 murders, Constance Harlow, guilty, patient endangerment, conspiracy, fraud, Dr. Shelby, Dr. Grant, Dr. Fuentes, guilty. 47 counts each of fraudulent medical assessment, professional licenses revoked permanently. The 6 family members who had paid Langford, guilty on conspiracy and elder exploitation charges. Sentencing came 3 weeks later. March 18, 2026, the same courtroom, the same judge, but this time the atmosphere was different, heavier, more final. The judge was a woman, 62 years old. Her father had been a Vietnam veteran. She'd heard 3 weeks of testimony about what happened to veterans when the system failed them. And she'd heard enough. Victoria Whitmore Ashford, the judge said, you systematically exploited your own mother, a decorated combat veteran who served her country with honor. You stole $341,000 from her. You sold her home. You had her declared incompetent through fraudulent means. You placed her in a facility where she was given incorrect medication. And when she escaped and lived on the street for 6 months, you drove past her twice a week and gave her just enough money to create the appearance of concern while allowing her to suffer. The judge paused. And when your mother refused to sign over her last remaining benefits, you beat her. You hit a 72-year-old woman in the face, and you left her in 18-degree weather to die. Victoria's attorney stood. Your Honor, my client. Sit down, counselor. I'm not finished. The attorney sat. You then attempted to murder your niece, Harper Whitmore, a 4th-grade teacher whose only crime was refusing to let you continue destroying her grandmother. You hired 2 men to attack her in a hospital room. They were stopped by a military working dog and a retired Navy SEAL, but your intent was clear. The judge looked directly at Victoria. The maximum sentence for your crimes is life imprisonment. Given the totality of your actions, the vulnerability of your victims, and the fact that you showed no remorse, even when confronted with overwhelming evidence, I am sentencing you to 32 years in federal prison. You will be eligible for parole in 16 years, which means you will be 64 years old before you can even apply for release. And given your conduct, I hope the parole board denies every application you make. Victoria's face went white. Her hands gripped the table. Her attorney whispered something to her. She didn't respond. Richard Langford received 28 years. Dr. Shelby received 15 years and permanent revocation of his medical license. The others received sentences ranging from 8 to 18 years. Victoria was transferred to Federal Correctional Institution, Danbury, medium security, Connecticut, as far from Virginia as the Bureau of Prisons could place her. 3 weeks after the sentencing, Garrett met Harper at a coffee shop in Norfolk, the same one where he'd been avoiding reality for 3 months. But today felt different, lighter, as if something heavy had finally been lifted. He placed a small velvet box on the table between them. This belonged to Petty Officer First Class Daniel Torres. He was my best friend. He died in Yemen, in my arms. He asked me to deliver this to his fiancée, and I couldn't. For 4 months, I carried it like a grenade I didn't know how to defuse. Harper looked at the box. Why are you telling me this? Because finding Eleanor taught me something. You don't carry weight alone. You share it with people who understand. Daniel's fiancée is a woman named Sophia Brennan. She lives in San Diego. And today, I'm finally going to call her. Because Eleanor showed me that the people we love deserve the truth, even when the truth is hard. Harper reached across the table, put her hand on Garrett's. They'd be proud of you. Daniel and Eleanor, what you did for her, what you're doing now, that's what service looks like after the uniform comes off. Garrett made the call that afternoon. Sophia answered on the third ring. He told her everything. The ring, Yemen, Daniel's last words, the 4 months of paralysis. Sophia listened. And when Garrett finished, she said, thank you for keeping him safe that long. Thank you for trying. And thank you for finally letting him come home. On April 20th, 2026, Harper and Eleanor stood together at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the Eleanor Whitmore Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to protecting elderly veterans from financial exploitation and guardianship abuse. Funded initially by the $2.3 million Eleanor received in restitution from Victoria's seized assets, governed by a board that included Agent Lena Cross-Doctor, Sarah Okafor, Garrett Reynolds, and Thomas Grant. Atlas served as the foundation's official therapy dog, visiting VA facilities, sitting with veterans who'd been exploited, offering the kind of uncomplicated loyalty that didn't require words. By the end of 2026, the foundation had helped 287 families, challenged 43 fraudulent guardianships, trained 112 via social workers in exploitation recognition, and prevented an estimated $4.2 million in theft. The 4 veterans on Langford's waiting list were saved before their guardianships were finalized. Their families were investigated. 3 were found to be legitimate. 1 was charged with conspiracy. Thomas Grant became the foundation's first client advocate. He visited facilities across Virginia, told his story, helped other veterans understand their rights. Samuel Avery, found in the West Virginia basement, moved into proper VA care. His nephew was serving 12 years for unlawful imprisonment and elder abuse. The 7 surviving victims from Langford's ledger were relocated to safe facilities with independent oversight. Their benefits restored, their dignity acknowledged. 2 remain missing. The foundation kept looking. On December 23, 2026, exactly 1 year after Atlas found Eleanor behind the dumpster, Harper and Garrett stood together at Arlington National Cemetery. They placed flowers at the graves of Harold Mitchell and Evelyn Carter, the 2 veterans who hadn't survived Victoria's system, the 2 whose names Langford had marked resolved in his ledger. Eleanor stood between them, 73 years old now, stronger, healthier. Wearing her bronze star, Atlas sat at her feet, amber eyes scanning the rows of white headstones. The dog who had started everything by refusing to drive past a parking lot. They're home now, Eleanor said quietly. Harold and Evelyn, they're home, and so am I. Harper put her arm around her grandmother's shoulders. We all are. Garrett's phone buzzed. A text from Sophia Brennan, a photo, Daniel Torres' engagement ring on her finger, worn on a chain beside a wedding band. She'd married someone else, a Marine, someone who understood. The text read, Daniel would want me to be happy. Thank you for letting me keep both. Garrett showed the photo to Harper. She smiled. You did good, Commander. We did good, all of us. They stood together as the winter sun set over Arlington. 3 people and 1 dog who had proven that the system could work. When someone refused to look away. When someone followed the alert. When someone decided that no veteran would be left behind. Not in a war zone, not in a courtroom, not in a parking lot, not ever. The Eleanor Whitmore Foundation would see to that. A young woman approached, mid-20s, nervous. She held a manila folder. Excuse me, are you Harper Whitmore from the foundation? Yes. My name is Jessica Brennan. My grandfather is in a facility in Richmond. His medication changed 6 months ago. He keeps saying it's wrong. His son says he's confused, but I don't think he is. I think something's wrong, and I don't know who else to ask. Harper took the folder, opened it, scanned the first page, looked at Eleanor, then at Garrett, then at Atlas. The dog's ears went forward. Alert. Ready. We'll look into it, Harper said. No veteran gets left behind, not on our watch. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Thank you so much. As she walked away, Eleanor placed her hand on Harper's shoulder. This is what it looks like when you turn pain into purpose, when you make sure the next person doesn't suffer alone. This is legacy. Atlas stood, shook himself, looked up at Garrett with patient expression. Garrett scratched behind the dog's ears. You ready, boy? Atlas's tail wagged once. Steady, sure, always ready. They walked together toward the parking lot, 3 people and 1 dog, carrying the weight of 2 names marked resolved, carrying the hope of 287 families restored, carrying the promise that the words Eleanor had taught for 32 years still meant something. We the people. In order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, not because the system was perfect, but because people like Eleanor and Harper and Garrett refused to let it stay broken. Behind them, Arlington stood in the fading light, rows of white stones marking promises kept, sacrifices honored, stories that would never be marked, resolved, only remembered, only continued, only carried forward by those who came after. The mission was never over. It just changed forms. From combat to courtrooms, from battlefields to hospital hallways, from silence to testimony. No veteran left behind, not then, not now, not ever.